very warm welcome. My name is Abdullah Saeed, and I'm the Sultan of Oman Professor of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Melbourne, Australia. It is a real pleasure to have you all with us for this session, which is part of our Voices of Contemporary Islamic Thought series. This webinar is part of a collaboration between the Institute of Ismaili Studies based in London and the Islamic Studies program of the University of Melbourne. And we are delighted to be working together to bring conversations like this to a wider audience. Our topic for today is an important one. Climate change and environmental damage are no longer abstract issues. They affect daily life, they affect food, water, health, and security. In that sense, climate justice has become a shared human concern. What makes today's discussion especially valuable is that it challenges a common assumption. Environmental ethics are often seen as modern or external to religious traditions. In fact, Islamic thought, much like other religious traditions, has engaged these questions for centuries. Ideas such as khilafah or vicegerency and amanah, which is trust, place responsibility at the center of human action. Power and ownership are never without accountability. The questions guiding this webinar move across several levels. They begin with Quranic concepts. They take us into classical Islamic literature. They then confront present-day realities, including development, energy dependence, and geopolitics. We also look at lived examples. These include faith-based environmental action in Muslim societies today. Finally, the discussion invites comparison. How do Islamic ideas sit alongside other religious traditions? And how do they resonate with indigenous or First Nations understandings of land, water, and life as sacred? So this is not just a theoretical discussion. It is about values in practice. It is about ethics in the real world. And it is about how we imagine a more sustainable future together. Now, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. Our main speaker today is Professor Mehmet Ozalp. He is a professor of Islamic Studies, a public intellectual, and a respected community leader with more than 3 decades of community service. In 2009, he founded the Islamic Sciences and Research Academy and is the serving executive director. He is the founder and head of school for the Center of Islamic Studies and Civilization at Charles Sturt University, Australia. Mehmet is also the founder and editor-in-chief of the Australian Journal of Islamic Studies. He is currently leading the establishment of the Museum of Islamic Art Australia. Mehmet is the author of over 60 publications, including 6 books. He is the recipient of several awards. Our second speaker is Dr. Salim Kassim-Lakha. He is an honorary senior fellow in the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne. He is a specialist in development studies with a particular focus on South Asia. His scholarly publications cover topics such as economic liberalization and the middle class in India, governance and social protection, civil society, and transnational migration. Our moderator today is Dr. Mohamed Keshavjee. He was born in South Africa, and he trained as a barrister in England and has become an internationally recognized specialist in cross-cultural mediation. He is currently a scholar of contemporary Muslim jurisprudence at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Dr. Keshavjee is the author of several books, among them the widely acclaimed Understanding Sharia, Islamic Law in a Globalized World. We are very fortunate to have such distinguished presenters with us today, and I look forward to a rich and thought-provoking discussion. Let me now hand over to Dr. Mohamed Keshavjee, who will guide us through the session.
Thank you, Professor Saeed, for that most generous introduction and providing a background to this program and series of programs that we are running today between the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London and the University of Melbourne in Australia. Good day, Professor Ozalp. With your kind permission, might I refer to you as Mehmet? And if you
Sure, you can, of course.
Thank you. And you can call me Mohammed, so it'll make our discussions much more informal and much more facilitative. Mehmet, climate justice and paying greater attention to the planet is no longer an academic issue. It is an existential threat that all countries face each day. The notion of an environmental ethic has not until recently been associated with the Islamic intellectual tradition. Yet, it has existed for centuries. Can you throw some light on this by explaining how concepts of khilafat, which is vice-regency, and amanah, which is trust, coupled with the notions of property and sovereignty mentioned in the Holy Quran, play out in a way that ordinary Muslims each day view the environment in their daily lives?
Thank you, Mohammed, for having me in this series. I'm really glad to be part of this discussion. And this is a great topic. It's a topic to my heart. I'm concerned about the environment and our role within that environmental ethics, the theology and thought is a very important intellectual activity for me. And I've been writing about it. And I'm actually working on a book with a Christian colleague on a Christian-Muslim responses to climate change and this idea of Anthropocene. Anthropocene meaning the human presence on Earth is actually shaping the climate and geology of the very planet we're living in. And along with that comes our impact on the wildlife, the animals and the plant world as well. So humans are as forced to be reckoned with, and we need to be contained. And so this is where these concepts, Quranic concepts that you mentioned, comes in. And in the very chapter 2 in the Quran, the very creation of the first human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the creator, says, I will create a caliph on earth. And the word used, caliph, is very significant. It could have said, I will create human beings on earth, but it says, I will create a caliph on earth, which means, the word caliph means a vicegerency or deputy, or someone who's giving authority over something. And there's also a representation of a higher authority over something else. So basically, humans have been given authority on earth, over the creation of earth by the leave of God. Of course, Quran says to God belongs everything, whatever is in heavens and earth. So the ultimate ownership is up to the Creator or to the Creator, but we can act. We're given freedom over the creation. But with that comes also this notion of amanah or trust. And that's given to us. So yes, the earth, we have power over earth, that we can use its resources. There are many other verses in the Quran that God says, I've created everything for you as a blessing, and then you can sort of use the whatever nature has to offer. But it has to be done in a way with a consciousness of amanah, that it is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the trust, the verse that talks about this, that says God has given the mountains refrained from this trust, but human beings took this amanah, and that humans are, oppressors and ignorant of this sometimes. So we don't realize our role in the planet, so we can also misuse, don't know the value of the trust. Because if something is trusted to you, it means it's valuable. So there's great value in creation. It is the creation of God where He reflects His names and attributes and the beauty and the diversity of His creative ability before our conscious eyes. And human beings are the only being who can appreciate this wonderful creativity and attribute it to God. And as a result of that, we believe and we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a very important concept, both of them. And when this Islamic, when environmentalism first appeared in 20th century, basically after atomic bomb and this deforestation that was happening when the economies after World War II was really developing fast, there was this environmental awareness. The green peace came about in that time, and this has Muslims in 20th century responded to that as well by referring back to our tradition. And the first thing that came to mind was this khilafah concept and the amanah concept. And that with the early writings, Hussein Nasr, for example, discussed this quite extensively. So obviously, the Quran also talks about fasad fil ard, like corruption appearing in the land and the sea by the hands of what human beings have done, and that we also can damage the environment too. So this is where Islamic concepts such as, moderation, wasatiyya comes in, avoidance of waste or israf, and the respect for living beings and living systems. The Prophet, peace be upon him, established protected conservation zones. It's called hima, and he emphasized planting of trees as a sadaqah jariyah, this as a charity for future generations. So basically, we see ourselves, or from Islamically, morally accountable stewards on earth. We have the right to consume or take from nature, but we are also we have to do that in a sustainable way.
Thank you, Mehmet. You've articulated that so beautifully. Maybe I could segue to the next point, which would be related, that in Islam there is the notion of amal al-saleh, or righteous deeds and good actions. So faith is not just belief and prayer, but action. We also have a rich literary tradition spanning different cultural and linguistic traditions that give rise to rights to animals, as you said, agency to them, as you mentioned. Here I'm referring to the case of the animals versus man from the Ikhwan al-Safa, the epistles of the Brethren of Purity in the 10th century Baghdad, and then Fariduddin Attar's Conference of the Birds, which gave the charge of a spiritual search to birds. Now, this was in the 12th century Persia. I mean, it's as you've mentioned very earlier on. So here we see the notion of rights given to non-human sentient beings over 1,000 years ago. Now, my question to you is, can you throw some light on these concepts, particularly Amal al-Saleh, and also the notion of how the varied literary genres in Islamic thought, intellectual tradition, is now really known in courses on environmental law? I mean, does the average student who goes into into environmental law aware of this particular contribution, among others? Could you throw some light?
Sure.
You teach the course yourself.
Sure, this is important. I guess one of my criticisms of this environmental discourse or Islamic response to environmentalism or climate change has been the lack of action. It was initially, in the first couple of decades of Islamic thought, in modern Islamic thought, it was all theoretical, theological, like concepts that we discussed earlier, but it didn't go too far. I actually wrote several years ago, there was COP26 happening in Egypt. I actually wrote that it's time for Muslim scholars to think about, is protecting the environment fard, or wajib or sunnah? Like, what is it? What is its fiqh designation? So we really need to go to that level. And I actually wrote about that. For me, it is fard or wajib, we should say. There's a wujubiyya, there's a necessary aspect to protection of the environment. And we could talk about that later as well. So it comes down to action. Doing something for the environment, for animals, or for anything good for that matter, is considered a good deed in Islam. So one of the most repeated expressions in the Quran is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who believe and do good deeds. This is why good deeds? Because when we do good deeds, we think good, we think positive. And when we think positive, then we are more likely to follow up with more good deeds. So there's a reinforcement that happens when we do something good for ourselves. And then we become a good example to people around us. And when everybody does good deeds, the society becomes good. So it's like religion is not only about beliefs. It has to be about action as well. And these actions have to be good. And in Islam, God will judge us in afterlife for our deeds and our faith as well. So it's very much related, linked with our faith as well. So in that respect, is something done for animals counted as good deed? It is. There is a story of a prostitute who drew water from a well to a thirsty dog. And the Prophet says in the hadith that she was forgiven and put into paradise just because of that deed. And then there was another woman who actually did not feed a cat and tied down that cat so the cat couldn't go and find its own food and died as a result of that. And she was put in hell for that. So just doing something good for animals was consequential for one's afterlife. So very important. And because the Quran actually, it says, there is no creature on earth, nor birds that fly with its wings, except that they are communities like you. So this is it's a concept of ecosystem, what we call, because the animals make up communities within their own species, and then the species, between the species, there's a balance as well. There's an interaction that happens that keeps order and balance in the natural world. So these are very important Quranic concepts that early scholars took up, like you mentioned, Ikhwan al-Safa, where there is in the 10th epistle, the case of animals versus man, where there's a mock trial that happens where the animal exploitation or cruelty are mentioned, and humans are warned for that. And in Attar's Conference of the Birds, like birds are represented as spiritual seekers. They're on a journey. They're looking for wisdom. They have escaping their fear and other shortcomings. So it's a very nice book, actually. I really think these classics should be taught in Islamic schools or schools run by Muslims. Like we really have to go, just like in English schools they study Shakespeare and things, those classics. Muslims really have to go back and teach our students these classical works. They're wonderful, very creative, and it is very enjoyable to read as well. So I should say that it wasn't just in literature. You know, we see, for example, the Ottoman Empire, 16th century, they had regulations on how much load you can put on donkeys or other animals so that they're not overloaded or overworked. There were regulations, and people they could be fined as a result of that. And they were rich people created endowments or foundations to treat injured birds. There were regulations about hunting in certain seasons that they respected the natural wildlife cycles. So basically, these are really important. Like good deeds are linked to also doing good for animals, wildlife, natural world, and Muslims understood that in the past. They took action, and now we need to do the same. And this also requires education, preparing our young kids, and also us feeling that we have Islamic responsibility on our actions that have impact on the natural world.
Thank you, Mehmet. I mean, you've hit on so many important points here. And because of the shortness of our program, I can't comment too much, but I'll just make a small point that when you mentioned that this
Sure.
is something to be taught to our Muslim children, I would go further, that like our Muslim children need to embrace Shakespeare and W.B. Yeats and Joyce and different Chaucer and different Western literary figures. In the same way, as a cross-cultural specialist in mediation, I'd love children from all societies, of all cultures, to also make Attar part of their repertoire. So it's really cross-cultural educational discourse. So children of all traditions would be able to feel as comfortable navigating this discourse. So you have hit on some very, very interesting points. I mean, it cuts right across. I've written a book on Sharia, and when you're speaking about the notion of whether it's fard, an obligation, some of these obligations are not legal. They impinge on your moral consciousness and your obligation as a transcendent obligation beyond the life we live in. So very, very rich points you've made. I'm going to now zoom straight into question number 3, which is very interesting in the sense that Muslim countries and civil society institutions champion the Al Mizan initiative in Nairobi, Kenya, in 2024, calling for ecocide to be treated like genocide. I mean, this is an interesting concept that now you're treating the environment like a human being. I mean, you say it's a crime, ecocide is a crime against humanity. Now, we need to here come down to the basics. How are Muslim countries giving effect to the Charter, considering that many are still so closely involved in a fossil fuel dominated economy and are themselves viewed in some cases as global polluters? Is there a greater move towards giving effect to the Charter through more collaboration and the raising of consciousness? Is this happening, and how are they squaring the circle?
Thank you. This is a very important document, Al Mizan, the Care for the Earth, was published in 2024. It actually goes back to, there was an earlier work or declaration, Islamic declaration for climate change in 2015, done in Istanbul by a group of intellectuals, Muslim intellectuals. That was 2015. So that was only 8 pages. Al Mizan is 55 pages. It's composed of 5 chapters. So it's a far more extensive work. I have looked at it, read it, and examined it carefully, and I also did a critical appraisal of the work. It brings a lot of Islamic concepts far more comprehensively than I've seen in any other previous publication. And what makes it great is that it is a work that is done by Muslim scholars, a collection, a group of Muslim scholars, and endorsed by many others as well. It is not document published by Muslim governments. But I really think that every Muslim country or government has to respond to it through a policy. This is a document that outlines the issues, the Islamic perspective on major things like environmental protection, response to climate change, the Anthropocene, like human impact on Earth, and touches on some of the environmental injustices that happens, or even socio-political injustices, over consumerism that is at the heart of contemporary economies, that always consumption, and growth, production, which is at the source of damage to the environment, really. So it does beg a response from governments in terms of policies that I think these same scholars should go take delegations to every Muslim country and demand a response. I haven't seen a proper governmental response to it. Perhaps it's early. I know that Muslim countries are involved in these big international, climate change conferences, or like COP type of events. They also love to stage them in their countries. But in terms of risk-taking concrete action, they fall short. In my chapter about going into the ethics of what is the Islamic ruling on our action towards the environment and climate change, I said my think is that every human being, there's a compulsion on every human being, every Muslim, to do something. Muslim organizations are responsible because they have the power and means to action, and also Muslim governments or governments, Muslim majority country governments, they have an obligation, because individuals cannot fix this alone. It requires legislation, policy, because it is the government that gives license to things. Like, for example, in Turkey, there was some 5 years ago, the government gave license for gold mine in a very nice, pristine, mountain area, and there was a massive public outcry for that. Literally thousands of people traveled there and they camped on this site to protest against this licensing. So Muslims are really, they are aware. They don't want environment to be destroyed. And that's partly religious, partly also the awareness that comes from the global, the movement in this environmental or protection of environment, that is also triggered by non-religious motives as well. And we're all aware of this. We're all influenced by all of that. And Muslim people in Muslim countries are not blinded to this. And it's really great to see Muslim scholars taking action, taking lead. But I think the governments are a little bit falling behind. Perhaps like Muslim countries are what we call developing countries, or sometimes even third world, unfortunately, and they deal with a lot of problems inside. And the environmental policies are on the lower end of the priority list, unfortunately. Other issues really take priority. Sometimes if it's to do with economic development versus protection of environment, the economic development aspect takes precedence at the expense of the environmental protection. But this is at the heart of the problem, you see. So philosophically, maybe we can get to this later. We human beings, we only take things from the environment. We give nothing back. The only thing we can do is really minimize the harm that we also incur.
That's very well put. I think Muslim countries are not the only countries who are dealing with these issues. I think they become a global issue, that to what extent does so-called development take priority over the obligation to the earth that we all owe. And I think the whole ethos of capitalism is based on the process of how much we can take out of the earth and How much degradation can we bring on the planet? By that, I don't mean that it's not a process that could have its positive dimensions, but I think there has to be a balance, as you have highlighted. That brings me, Mehmet, to question number 4, which I thought is a very practical example, and I myself was so educated when I got to know about this, that there are some interesting developments taking place today in some Muslim majority countries, such as Indonesia, here where faith-based civil society organizations have passed fatwas, which are really basically judicial opinions passed by a mufti or a religious scholar. Can you describe how that works in practice in the protection of the rainforest, for example? Because I believe that those fatwas were passed with government backing in a way and a civil society engagement where people then they saw a shared humanity of interests in order to protect that's one thing, and maybe you can roll it with a question that's not in here, is the notion of biodiversity is also part of ritual practice in some countries. Myself and Salim come from East Africa, and I'm amazed that in a place like Zanzibar and Mombasa, certain trees are invested with certain spiritual qualities, where people go and pray for people of their ancestors. So I think it's sort of so interwoven, this whole notion of biodiversity is part of ritual connectivity. Might you throw some light if you are aware of the Indonesian situation?
Yeah, sure. Indonesia is a very important example or a testing spot, actually, because it's one of the biggest Muslim populations. It resides over a landmass or archipelago that has very important rainforests, and also it's not an oil-producing country as well. So you could have an economy is developing, so you can really test. So if some of these teachings can be put to practical policy or legislative or even educational setting, and Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah movements, which are two of the biggest movements in Indonesia, they have issues of fatwas declaring, large-scale deforestation, illegal logging, and forced burning as haram, as prohibited acts, which is also very, very good, because not only we need to talk about like fard or wajib or good deeds of doing something good for the environment, we also need to talk about what is haram, what is prohibited and illegal Islamically. And so this is a very important case in Indonesia. And I also know that, like for example, when there was a group of Indonesians, they were using dynamite for fishing. You put a bomb and the fish die and they just collect it. It was just easy, but it's very destructive for marine life and marine ecosystems. So these group of fishermen were educated in Islamic ethics of that we have responsibility, just like we discussed earlier, and that it's a good deed to protect the environment. And these fishermen abandoned that practice because they felt Islamically they were responsible and it wasn't good to be destructive or do this fishing in that destructive way. So it really works when you educate people. Like religion is very powerful. Islam is a very powerful religion. It's a force for goodness. If it's used for goodness, it is excellent. Obviously, you could also do the opposite as well. So in the case of these Muslim governments, though, I mean, it still happens. Like these illegal logging and deforestation, it's still happening. So why is that still happening? Because of corruption in some cases, or these governments, they prioritize like economic benefit over environmental protection, as I mentioned before, not necessarily corruption. So they don't have any qualms about giving these licenses to companies to do mining or forestation. I think the government officials have to be educated.
Mm.
They have to be educated And at the end of the day, they're all human beings. What we say government is a group of people, thousands of individuals who work for the country, for the government, and they are human beings. They have ideas, thoughts, worldviews, and interests and motivations. So if they are educated as well in this respect, and the departments like ministries that are looking after the environment, they should be given powers, over, or they should be included in decision-making process that give licenses to companies to do work that's related to the environment. So very important. And sometimes in some countries, all these regulations exist. It's on paper, but when it comes to practice, unfortunately, it's not always applied. There is room for improvement, definitely. It's encouraging that we have all these fatwas or religious rulings are given. Muslims are being active. Governments are putting goals and some policies, but the enforcing those policies need a lot more work.
Well, that idea you spoke about the fishermen, I don't know if you had written about this or where did I pick up that they tried that with the fishermen in Tanzania, someplace in East Africa. And I think when the fishermen saw how that form of fishing was deleterious, they accepted the religious teaching immediately and they made changes beyond what the government was able to reach out to them. So I think there is a sort of a knock-on effect of these type of ventures or endeavors going to different parts of the world. But that's a very interesting point you've made. Looking at the fatwa at one level, the large Muslim organizations and the authority of religious teachers, and then coming down to the fishermen right at the bottom of this whole totem pole. So that's a very interesting point. And I stand to be corrected, but I think it was Tanzania where this was tried out, or somewhere in East Africa. That then brings me to the next point, and this is very interesting in a country like Australia. I mean, we have touched on an Islamic environmental ethic, which is rather distinctive. And I would say from a practical point of view, embryonic at this point in term, but very deeply embedded historically. My question to you, Mehmet, would be, how does this concept compare with other religious traditions? Because you said you're writing a book with a Christian author. And in a country like Australia, with indigenous and First Nations groups who attribute sacredness to the environment, such as trees, rivers, mountains, animals. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is so deeply embedded in so many cultures.
Sure. Like one of my critiques of Al Mizan was that, or maybe shortcomings, was that it did not include the indigenous perspectives as well. I think there's a lot of very good room there for us to explore that as well. One of the unfortunately the way indigenous spiritualities or religions and perspective is dismissed in much of the Muslim world because they are seen as pagan or paganistic. This is a bit of an issue. But if we really go back to how these may have developed over time, like the indigenous people lived in very simple lives, very much in nature. There was no cities or civilizations. So they were they were very much integrated into the natural world. So for them, for that reason, the earth, the land, or what they call country in Australia, like the indigenous Aborigines call it country, they saw all people part of that country and the land. And they also saw them as part of the life that this land supports, together with animals and plants. So it's a very unique perspective, which we have lost. Like humanity has lost that since we became based in cities, metropolitan environment, where we detach ourselves from the natural world, created these artificial dunya, It's very interesting. Quran talks about ard as the earth, the natural earth, and dunya, which is the world that we made up ourselves. That Quran is critical of that, but it's very praises the ard, the earth itself, because the earth, in the Quran, is full of ayah, the signs of Allah, signs of the Creator, for us to reflect over. Quran says, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, that everything in heavens and earth glorify God in a way. Like, very interesting concept, like, isn't it? It's very beautiful that the Quran says that everything in heavens and earth worship Allah, worship God in a way that you don't understand, in a language that we don't understand, so in their own unique ways. These are very specific things, teachings in the Quran, very much in tune with those indigenous understandings. Perhaps the only difference is that Islam avoids, sacralizing nature itself. Like, sacredness lies not in the object, but its relationship with the Creator. That like, things are valuable not in and of themselves, but because they are related to the Creator as God's creation, and also the fact that they're worshiping God in a natural way. So Muslims are actually, being Muslim is sometimes following that natural order, that because the natural nature submits to the Creator, and we need to submit, surrender to the Creator, just like the natural world. So not in competition of them. So I think these indigenous perspectives and spiritualities remind us this aspect of Islam and religion and our relationship with the natural world far more forcefully than our own, philosophical or educational and what civilizations that we built on our own accord. And I have to say, this artificial nature of our world is emphasized further by social media and internet. Like, people are literally, we're also in the cities that are artificial. Or when I say artificial, it's not natural, it's a concrete roads, buildings, detached from nature. And then on top of that, everyone's in their phones in a different world within, is a more virtual world in that. So it's very strange that we've put ourselves into, and the detachment from the natural world is huge in our own time. So I think the indigenous perspectives remind us that.
They're very rooted, as you say, yeah. That brings me now to the last question, which is quite not convoluted, but has three parts. But I will just try and see how we can zoom
Okay.
into it in a very structured way. As an educationist and a public intellectual who espouses a high environmental sensibility, as you do, can you tell us whether there is a transnational global environmental movement in the Muslim world today? And if not, where do you feel the leadership of such a movement can come from? I'm not here from talking about political side, that who can it come from, this country or that country. Do you see that type of leadership coming from civil society, or does it come from young people today? We think of Greta Thunberg, for example, those type of endeavors. That's number one. Number two, how do you see the development of a more robust civil society globally in the years to come, where that type of discourse can take place, whereby our civil society could speak to our politicians and tell them that that environment is no longer something that is not important. It could become a priority of all political parties. The whole fact is that we don't have to become binary or adversarial, but it's an issue that we all share in common. How can we nurture that discourse? And then the last part of that question is that it's a big issue we don't want to get into now, but do you see any role for artificial intelligence in contributing towards that greater consciousness not only in understanding, but also helping us in bringing about greater changes in the environment. I mean, these are the positive dimensions. So it's a three-part question, but it will be a good way of you rolling up. Number one, where do we see the leadership coming from? Number one. Number two, can we envisage a robust civil society that can be in contact with our politicians to get them to support all political parties to enhance this consciousness? And lastly, we can only touch on that. Do you see a role for artificial intelligence in enhancing this process? Because there are major opportunities. There may be downsides, but I see great opportunities as well.
All right. Well, that's a very good three-part question. Well, let me start with the leadership aspect. Regrettably, we don't have a single unified global Muslim environmental movement. There isn't one. Muslim world is huge. It's got spread across 57 countries, 2 billion people. So it's very hard to have a single environmental movement. And also, there are very significant big issues, in the Muslim world, unfortunately, that take precedence. Like, for example, this issue of Gaza became very important since 2023. So for the last 3 years, that was the number one issue, where environmental or other issues went to the background or secondary or even third, fourth in that order of what our potential and awareness falls into. So, but there are also a growing body of a transnational ecosystem made up of scholars, youth activists, non-government organizations, educators, intellectuals and faith leaders. These are increasing as well. So it's a good sign. And they're connected through a platform, online digital platforms. Like what we're doing right now is a good example of that. I know that Muslim organizations in different Muslim countries are taking action, like green mosque concepts, like in our organization, for example, we signed to Australian religious response to climate change. There's a body made up of different people from different religions coming together, having a single voice. Because I think that's also important, that we need to collaborate with people of other religions, activists from other religions, other backgrounds, even secular activists, because it's a shared common vision that we need to protect the environment. It's in our interest, actually. It's in the interest of humanity. Earth is the only planet we got. Like if you look at pictures of Mars, it's just rocks and soil. There's absolutely same color. There's no life in it. There's nothing. The Earth looks like paradise compared to Mars. It is paradise in this universe. So it's extremely valuable. So we need to do anything in our power to preserve it. And I think this appreciation of the value, because when you think something is really valuable, you wouldn't want to lose it. You wouldn't want to damage it. That's what the concept of amanah that we started this conversation with comes in. I have this idea actually where I really want all mosques in Australia to do a sermon in the same week, to do a sermon on environmental protection and Islamic obligation of that. Like we could sort of, I wish we could agree, I don't know, the first week of June or something, or first week of Ramadan every year, if all the mosques do the same or similar sermons on protection of environment, it just magnifies that, it just brings it to the foreground of our thought. And because every mosque is doing it at the same time, everyone knows we're all talking about it. I think that's what's lacking. It's limited to people who really care. Everyone else is in a different world, assuming that others are doing the job. But There's an obligation on everyone, every Muslim organization, as I said. We all have to, we put protection of environment as a value of our organization. That we have to do everything, like our decision-making processes or our practices and in the organization has to reflect, care for the environment. So that has to be there. So there's a lot that can be done. And then it has to be grounded in, I really think the Islamic colleges have a big part in this to play. They really need to educate young Muslims that it is a religious requirement to look after the environment. And I know they're doing, but maybe more can be done in the Islamic scripture classes rather than just, I don't know, biology or Islamic environment in class in general, and you just touch on it a little bit. So a lot of this is taught from a secular perspective only. And I think we can do more than that. In terms of AI, AI is a transformative technology, just like invention of printing press, or electricity. It will play a massive role in changing the way our lives works, and our like products, all the living standards, machines that we work with, services that we get used to will be shaped by AI. And if we believe in the predictions, there will be more robotics as well, like robotics combined with AI will do a lot of jobs very cheaply. So that means either, I guess, there will be lots of jobless people, or there will be lots of people with a lot of free time, but they still have some universal income. I mean, they don't have to worry about income, but they will have lots of free time. Just like building the machines, the household appliances that we have and computers made life easier, that you don't have to have slaves anymore, or you don't have to have housemaids anymore. It's very easy to live. AI will make it even easier. And so that leaves us in this vacuum. Either humanity will go towards more entertainment to fill that free time, or more connection with the natural world. And I think the AI is a big disruptor in this respect. It will really make us question our purpose on this planet. And like AI itself is actually very energy consuming, like all these data centers. And like we really have to think about the carbon footprint impact of AI and the related technologies as well. Are we saving anything there, or are we making it worse? So all these questions are very new. I really think as Muslims we need to look at AI from Islamic ethics perspective as well, like not just ethics but theology, consciousness. Where does consciousness come in? Can AI be conscious? Like from that all the way to the practical aspect of using AI for many things is ethical problems that we have to solve.
Thank you. I mean, you've touched on some beautiful pieces. I just wanted to make one or two very small comments. I won't be too long.
Sure.
Mention the whole idea of the planet is the only place we have left. I was thinking of Dr. Carl Sagan's the booklet he wrote, The Pale Blue Dot. And he said from 6 billion kilometers away, our planet is just a little dot in the enormity of the universe with a shaft of light flowing on it. And I just thought that it just shows the enormity of the universe, the creativity of the transcendent Allah. Makes you wonder that what role do we have in that whole space in terms of our relations with the environment, with the cosmos, with the transcendent, with our inner soul. It's a fascinating point you've touched on. I notice you want.
Well, that's a very very nice Carl Sagan famous instance from his documentaries. But I want to say that even though Earth is very small and it looks very insignificant, the Earth compared to the cosmos is like the comparison of a flowing tap to ocean.
Mm,
You know, ocean is big, vast, this huge body of water, but it's still, you know, or more or less still.
mm,
Whereas a tap is flowing all the time. So
mm,
given time, the tap can fill many more oceans than the ocean itself. So
mm,
Earth is like that because of the diversity of life on it and the fact that there's a continual flux of creativity. There like there are 20 million species of animals and plants or more that we
mm,
haven't still even discovered. Like the creativity is immense,
mm,
whereas there's nothing on Mars, nothing on the sun in terms of like living beings.
mm,
So the Earth, yeah, it could be very small and size-wise insignificant, but in terms of the being a focal point of creativity, constantly flowing creativity, the consciousness of human being, like from that little dot, we can investigate the entire universe and even discover that universe had a beginning and it's expanding. You know, it's amazing.
mm, mm. So the microcosmic dimension through which we
Yeah.
can see the entire universe could also be that little aperture, like a camera.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
I also think that you've touched on the fact that an artificial intelligence ethic informed by Muslim fundamental principles is something that's now in the process of being developed, I think. I know that scholars looking at this, and inshallah, we hope to have one of our programs on artificial intelligence and what would be the Muslim informing ethic when you think of the
Mm.
algorithms that need to be informed. So it's a huge, huge area of development. And we hope that there'll be sort of a multidisciplinary type of a process so that
Mm.
technology is not seen in isolation of the deeper principles that inform our understanding of where we belong
Mm.
in the world. With that, Mehmet, I'm going to pass the baton on to uh, Dr. Salim Lakha. I'm going to call him Salim. Yes, Salim has been a colleague of mine for over 50 years now and a friend. So, Salim, over to you. And remember that we have 10 solid minutes for you to give us your three takeaways. So, over to you, Salim.
Mehmet, first of all, let me say that you have provided us immense insights into the way in which Islam treats the question of environment. And it's been a fascinating discussion listening to you and Mohammed. You've covered so much ground, Mehmet, that I find it really challenging to extract uh, three takeaways, as Mohammed would like me to do. So I feel really, in a way, humbled listening to you. And I wish we could have had more time for this discussion. But the first takeaway from my point of view is the notion of amanah or trust that is given by the Creator to humans with respect to the environment. And I think this is a very important point that you've raised, because the notion of amanat or trust, what it means is we have to have consciousness of the trust given to us by the Creator with respect to the environment. And morally, as you said, humans are accountable for the treatment of the environment. So, what this beginning of your discussion strikes me is that within Islamic thought, Islamic worldview, the way we treat the environment is something part and parcel of the religion. It is integral to how we are expected to conduct our lives. And I think this is something which is not understood by people Muslims and non-Muslims sometimes. And I don't want to generalize. Of course, there are people who are very knowledgeable, and we know, for example, as you mentioned, in Indonesia and other parts of the world, the research has revealed that even ordinary people, people who are referred to as, peasants, are also conscious about the environment. But I think with modernization, what we are finding is that the awareness of the environment has been very much captured, as you mentioned, by consumerism. And I'm glad you raised that issue of consumerism, because when we're talking about the environment today, whether we're talking about it from the perspective of Islam or other faiths, I think we can not look at it. We cannot look at it in isolation from the way in which the world economy works and the way in which humans are captured, by the whole culture of consumerism. So I think there needs to be in one's analysis a kind of interaction between the Islamic thought or religious thought, what it requires, and how humans in contemporary capitalist system are, in a way, pressured within the system to engage in consumerism and materialism. So I think your point about the fact that humans take everything from the environment and give very little back is something that struck me, because it's diametrically opposed to what Islam as a religion requires human beings, or Muslims, I should say more particularly, to keep in mind in terms of their interaction with the environment, is to give back to the environment. And the question is, how do we give back to the environment in a way which will nourish the environment and will lead to sustainable existence, sustainable development, and so on. My second takeaway was very much connected with what you said about the response of Muslim countries, governments, and you feel that there has not been enough in terms of policy and in terms of action. And I think this is an area that needs a lot of work by Muslim scholars or non-Muslim scholars as well, and governments and the bureaucracies in Muslim countries, is how can you really actualize some of the teachings of Islam, and how can you make Muslim countries, their economies, their societies more responsible in the way in which they interact with the environment. So I think your point about the fact that government response needs more kind of policy input is something that should be taken on board. And in terms of action, as you said, Muslim countries fall short of what is required. Now, moving on, I think the third takeaway that I have comes from your discussion about indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge, indigenous spirituality. And you raised a very important point in my mind when you were talking about that particular subject. You mentioned that Quran talks of natural earth and dunya and distinguishes between the two. Now, the notion of earth, as I understand from what you were saying, is elevated philosophically within Islam because the earth, the natural world, is regarded as having signs of the divine. And I think here, as Muslims, but I think more generally, people need to spend more time in nature. They need to contemplate more about nature. And it's very interesting, you know. I used to be in a bushwalking club in Melbourne, and we used to go bushwalking. And the effect that bushwalking had on people was just immense in terms of their well-being. And I remember one of the corporate women executive who used to come on bushwalks mentioned that, you know, she found whenever she came on bushwalks, her level of stress diminished substantially, and it helped her in terms of her well-being, overall well-being, I should say. So I think we need to look upon nature not as something that is to be exploited, uncritically, but nature is having signs of the divine, and how can we appreciate the divine through the creation of God. And nature is the natural world, according to Muslims, is the creation of Allah. So that was my third takeaway. Now I could go into more issues, but I think I've already run out of my 10 minutes. And so I'll have to bring my takeaways to a conclusion. But once again, thank you very much. And I hope that your interview is viewed widely once we put it on YouTube and on the Institute of Ismaili Studies website. Thank you very much, Mehmet.
Thank you, Salim, for that wonderful summary. Very well done.
Now, I will now call upon Professor Abdullah Saeed to give his summary of the discourse today. And with that, I would like to really, get off the platform and leave it to Abdullah to give us his summing up of today's fascinating session.
Let me end with a few brief reflections from the discussion. We have heard that Muslims are not starting from scratch on environmental concerns. Many Muslim thinkers, scholars, and environmental groups are already engaged. Much of this work is grounded in the Quran. The Quran repeatedly reminds us of balance, restraint, trust, and accountability. These ideas are being taken seriously by scholars and communities today. We also heard about real-world challenges. Development pressures are intense. Economic growth often comes at the cost of forests, water, and biodiversity. Corruption plays a major role here as well. It weakens laws and accelerates environmental destruction. At the same time, there are hopeful developments. In countries like Indonesia, for example, religious scholars and leaders and organizations have issued fatwas, or Islamic legal opinions, declaring illegal logging and destruction of rainforests as haram or prohibited. This is significant. The Islamic concept of haram is being used to frame environmental destruction as a moral violation, not just a legal one. In some communities, this has led to real changes in behavior. We also touched on biodiversity. Care for animals and nature is embedded in Islamic ritual life and moral teaching. When communities hear this message through religious scholars' sermons and teaching, and education, practices and behavior can change. The discussion also reminded us of the importance of indigenous perspectives here in Australia, for example. Indigenous understandings emphasize deep spiritual connection to land, rivers, animals, and place. Humans are not separate from nature, but part of it. This stands in sharp contrast to the highly artificial world many of us now inhabit. There is much to learn from this indigenous worldview. Finally, we noted that there is no strong transnational Muslim environmental movement yet, but there are many individuals, scholars, leaders, and groups doing important work. The challenge is collaboration across countries, across religious traditions. Muslim religious leaders can do more through their sermons and teaching and public engagement. Islamic schools also have a key role to play in shaping environmental responsibility from an early age. A stronger civil society is essential. New tools like AI may help raise awareness, support accountability, and connect efforts globally. One message is clear. Protecting the environment cannot be optional. It should be our number one priority. It is about faith. It is about justice. And it is about our shared future. Thank you.